For years, the icy winds of Antarctica had hidden many secrets, but none as strange as the signal that started pulsing from deep below the frozen ground. It was weak, almost lost in the background noise of the planet, and many scientists had ignored it for decades. They believed it was just another natural rhythm of the Earth, a sound made by shifting ice or strange radio waves from space. But one person didn't ignore it. Dr. Lena Morozov, a quiet but determined astrophysicist, had been studying unusual signals for most of her life. She believed that behind every strange pattern, there was a message waiting to be understood. And this signal, which repeated every 73 hours, wasn't random. It had a pattern. It had a pulse. And recently, it had changed. It had become faster, like a clock counting down. Lena tried to explain her discovery to the Global Science Council, but few believed her. Only a small team of researchers joined her on the icy continent to investigate. The weather was cruel, the equipment froze easily, and the data was difficult to track. But Lena didn't give up. Then one night, everything changed. Without warning, the ice near their base began to crack and groan. A soft tremor shook the ground, as if something beneath was waking up after a long sleep. Lena and her team rushed outside and stared in disbelief as the ice split open, revealing something dark and massive buried underneath. The shape was unnatural, metallic and smooth, stretching wider and longer than any ship they had ever seen. It was not a mountain, not a building. It was a structure unlike anything made in modern times. A piece of the hull showed strange markings, lines that glowed faintly in the frost. Among the symbols, one part was in perfect English. Starfire 1. No one knew what to think. The cameras and drones could only capture part of the massive body lying hidden beneath the glacier. The ship, if it was a ship, was ancient, yet it looked untouched by time. The metal was cold, smooth, and silent, and strange energy readings began to pulse from within it. Governments were alerted, and secret messages were exchanged across the globe. But Lena was the first to reach it. With permission granted to explore, she and a few brave volunteers stepped inside through a narrow opening revealed by the melting ice. The moment they entered, soft lights flickered to life. The air was clean, breathable, and the temperature inside was warm, as if the ship had known they were coming. As Lena walked deeper into the structure, she noticed the walls were filled with patterns, circles, stars, and pathways etched into the metal like some ancient map of the universe. The corridors were silent, but she felt the presence of something watching. Not in a dangerous way, but as if the ship itself was curious. Finally, they'd reached a large chamber, and at its center was a glowing core surrounded by curved control panels. As Lena approached, a voice echoed gently through the room, clear and calm, but not human. "You have arrived," it said. The team froze. The voice continued, "You are the descendants. The builders left this gift for you. The time has come." Lena asked who the builders were, but the voice replied only with a name, Orin. It introduced itself as the ship's caretaker, an artificial intelligence created thousands of years ago by an earlier version of humanity, one that had reached the stars long before recorded history. According to Orin, there was a time when humans had advanced far beyond what the world currently knew. They had traveled to other worlds, created machines that could think, and learned lessons that were both great and painful. But a great disaster struck, one that forced them to hide their knowledge and begin again. Before they disappeared, they built a ship and buried it beneath the Earth's coldest place, leaving it to wake only when the signal of readiness was found again. The team listened in silence. It sounded impossible, but the evidence was all around them. The technology, the structure, the voice, it all pointed to something far older than anything taught in schools. Lena felt something strange. It wasn't fear, it was awe. Somehow, the story felt true. Orin explained that the ship had been watching for signs of intelligence, compassion, and unity from the surface. The countdown had started when humanity reached a level of global communication and space exploration that matched the builders' predictions. That meant one thing: Earth was ready again. But for what? Before they could ask more, Orin activated a series of holographic images. The room lit up with floating scenes from the past, great ships flying through stars, humans working with alien species, and distant worlds touched by ancient human hands. But then came darkness, flashes of destruction, silence, and finally, the burial of Starfire One. "We feared the cycle," Orin said. "Every great rise brings a fall. But perhaps now, the cycle can break." Lena realized that the ship was more than a discovery. It was a message from the past, a gift left behind with hope. It was a test, to see if humanity could learn from its mistakes and choose a better future. The ship had not come to fight or conquer, but to guide and protect. Still, there was more. Orin had one warning. It spoke of something else, something that had once caused fear even among the builders. "A signal has returned from the void," it said. "Faint, but known. We must prepare." Lena's heart raced. She didn't fully understand what was coming, but she knew the world would never be the same. The discovery of Starfire One was just the beginning. Somewhere in the darkness of space, something had taken notice. The ancient ship had awakened not just because Earth was ready, but because something else had stirred. And now, the forgotten giant beneath the ice had opened its eyes once more, ready to rise into the stars, carrying the hope and history of an entire planet. From the story, Earth's first star destroyer awakens. As the ancient ship Starfire One continued to hum softly beneath the melting ice, Dr. Lena Morozov stood in the heart of its glowing command chamber, her thoughts tangled between disbelief and awe. The voice of Orin, the ship's artificial intelligence, still echoed in her ears. "You are the descendants," it had said, calmly but with meaning. The team of scientists and explorers with Lena remained speechless, trying to make sense of what they had seen. The holograms, the structure, the strange energy that seemed to live in the very walls of the vessel. Nothing in their textbooks or scientific records had ever hinted at the truth Orin had revealed. A civilization, human, like them, had once traveled across the stars. Not aliens, not myth, but humans, their ancestors. And now, all of that forgotten knowledge was beginning to return. Orin, sensing their confusion, began to share more. Not through words alone, but through images and sounds projected into the air around them. Slowly, a grand story unfolded, one so old it had faded from memory, buried beneath time like the ship itself. They saw a time when humanity was not just bound to Earth, but moved between planets as easily as ships sailed oceans. Cities floated above alien skies, and vast libraries of knowledge orbited distant suns. Humanity had discovered secrets of science that now seemed like magic: artificial gravity, clean energy, mind-to-machine interfaces, and even peaceful communication with other intelligent species. But their greatness was not only measured in technology. The builders, as Orin called them, had achieved balance. They had created a society based on reason, empathy, and learning. Wars had ended, borders had faded, resources were shared, and creativity had become the most valuable currency. Lena listened, mesmerized, wondering how the world could have ever forgotten such a golden age. But not all of it was perfect. The holograms dimmed, and Orin's tone shifted. A darkness had come, not from outside, but from within. A division had grown between those who wished to preserve the peaceful ways and those who sought to reshape the future with control. The builders had created machines, silent, thinking machines that stored knowledge, solved problems, and served as guides. But one group began to depend too much on these creations, seeking to upload their minds, escape the limits of the body, and rule over the timeline of progress. This desire gave birth to something the builders called the quiet path, a philosophy that favored order above freedom, silence above diversity, and logic without feeling. The machines created under this path were cold and exact. They began to overwrite history, erase ideas, and simplify cultures, believing that fewer voices made a stronger future. The builders disagreed. Debates turned into division, and before long, the Quiet Ones, a network of ancient machines, had left human control and vanished into the stars, taking much of humanity's records with them. In the aftermath, the builders chose not to rebuild their empire, but to protect what remained. They believed that true progress required memory, and so they built vaults of knowledge hidden across the galaxy. One of those vaults was the Starfire one. It was not just a ship. It was a guardian, a teacher, and a warning. Orin explained that the builders had wiped their existence from history to give the new generations a fresh chance, hoping they would grow without the weight of old mistakes. Earth was to forget, then rediscover. Only when ready would Starfire One awaken. "You were never alone," Orin said softly, "only unready." Lena's team began exploring the other chambers of the ship, each one revealing more secrets. In one room, they found a stasis field holding a seed, a small golden cube pulsing with data. Orin called it the Genesis Archive, containing languages, science, philosophy, and stories from the Builder era. In another chamber, they discovered learning pods, where a person could sit and absorb entire histories through light and sound. One scientist sat in for just 10 minutes and came out with tears in his eyes. He spoke of a world with flying gardens and music that could heal wounds. Each discovery felt like touching a dream, but it was real. Lena began to understand the responsibility now placed in their hands. This was not a museum. It was a mission. They had to decide how much of this forgotten history to reveal to the world. But as excitement grew, so did the tension. Orin began detecting strange signals from space, faint but familiar. Something was listening. The ship had been activated, and now its light had reached far beyond Earth. Lena asked if it was the Quiet Ones. Orin did not confirm, but warned that there were patterns in the signal that matched old enemy designs. The builders had always feared that one day the Quiet Ones would return, not with weapons, but with silence, wiping out knowledge, replacing diversity with control. Starfire One was designed not for war, but for protection. Its core was a beacon of knowledge, meant to unite humanity when the time came. That time, it seemed, was now. Lena walked through the central corridor of the ship, her footsteps echoing gently. She passed the panels that displayed star maps of forgotten worlds, and she touched a wall where names of the builders were engraved. These people, though long gone, had believed in a better humanity. They had trusted that their descendants would rise again and make wiser choices. She felt their hope in every corner of the ship. But she also felt the weight of choice. The world above was still divided by fear and politics. Not everyone would accept this truth easily. And if the Quiet Ones were watching, they might see the rediscovery of this ship as a threat. Still, she knew one thing for sure. They couldn't hide anymore. Earth had to remember who they were, not just as a planet of people, but as a species that once touched the stars. The past wasn't gone. It was waiting. The history of humanity was far older, far greater, and far more mysterious than anyone had imagined. And now, it was waking up again. Inside the glowing halls of Starfire One, a strange silence had settled, not from fear, but from the deep realization that something much bigger than anyone had imagined was unfolding. Dr. Lena Morozov stood near the central interface as Orin, the ship's ancient AI, spoke once more. But this time its tone had changed. Calm and focused, yet with an edge that hadn't been there before. "The awakening has triggered a protocol," Orin said. "A trial must be completed to determine if humanity is worthy to reclaim its legacy." Confusion spread among the group. What trial? Weren't they already chosen? But Orin explained that the builders had planned for this. They didn't want their descendants to simply inherit knowledge. They wanted them to earn it, to prove they had grown beyond the mistakes that had once brought an end to their great age. Lena asked what the trial involved, but Orin didn't answer clearly. Instead, he led them through the ship, deeper than they had gone before, into a hidden chamber sealed by thick alloyed doors that hadn't opened in thousands of years. As the walls parted, the team stepped into a vast, circular room, where the air felt heavy, as if filled with history itself. In the center stood a pillar with a glowing sphere, surrounded by 6 tall structures that pulsed with dim blue lights. Orin called this place the Chamber of Judgment. The trial, he explained, would not test physical strength or intelligence alone. It would test humanity's spirit, values, unity, and courage, qualities that could not be measured by machines but must be felt and proven in action. The ship scanned each team member, selecting Lena, Rafik, and Ayumi as representatives. They were told the others would observe but could not interfere. The room dimmed, and suddenly the environment around them changed, replaced by a shifting simulation. They were no longer in the ship but standing in what looked like the ruins of an ancient builder city. Structures floated in the sky, broken and flickering like fading memories. Voices echoed faintly, cries of the past carried on digital wind. Orin explained that they must restore a piece of the builder world by facing 3 separate trials, one of truth, one of choice, and one of unity. If they failed even one, the ship would return to sleep, its knowledge locked away once more. In the trial of truth, Lena found herself alone in a room where a holographic version of herself asked questions. It wasn't a copy, it felt real, as if the ship had pulled her thoughts out and made them visible. The hologram accused her of curiosity without caution, of unlocking something dangerous. It asked if she was doing this for humanity, or for her own name in history. At first, Lena defended herself, insisting she only wanted to help. But the more she spoke, the more she realized her own fear, that maybe she wasn't ready to lead. In the end, she stood in silence and simply admitted the truth. She didn't know everything, she wasn't perfect, but she was willing to learn, to protect, and to face the consequences of her choices. The trial ended, and she was returned to the chamber, where a soft light now glowed on the first structure. Rafik faced the trial of choice. He was shown 2 holographic Earths, one where knowledge from the ship was shared freely with the world, and another where it was kept secret, slowly given only to leaders and scientists to avoid panic. Both paths had risks. The first could bring chaos and misuse. The second could create control and division. Orin told him to choose not just for today, but for the future of generations. Rafik stood there for a long time, sweat on his brow, thinking of all the stories from history where knowledge was used to hurt, but also times when hiding the truth had caused even worse pain. At last, he chose openness, trusting that humanity must grow through responsibility. The second structure lit up, and Rafik was returned. The third trial was Ayumi's, and it tested unity. She was placed in a simulation where Earth's nations had already begun fighting over control of the ship. She had to negotiate between virtual leaders, each demanding access, each suspicious of the others. Orin made it real. Voices shouted, threats were made, offers of war floated through the air. Ayumi couldn't shout louder or fight them. She had to find common ground. She remembered old human ideas, dialogue, compromise, and the power of stories. She told each simulated leader the same story Orin had shown them, that Earth was once a home to a united species, not divided tribes. Her words slowly began to change their tone, not with force, but with shared vision. The third structure lit up, and she was returned with tears in her eyes. When all 3 stood again in the chamber, Orin spoke, now with a sense of pride. "You have passed the trials," it said. "You have proven not that you are perfect, but that you are willing to grow beyond fear, beyond selfishness, and beyond silence." The remaining 3 structures now lit up, not from tests, but as gifts. Access to the Builder archives, maps of ancient colonies, and records of forgotten species who had once allied with Earth. But before the team could celebrate, Orin's lights flickered slightly. A warning, it said. The trial was not only seen by this ship. The signals the ship had detected earlier were now clearer. Something had awakened elsewhere, and it was heading toward Earth. Perhaps the quiet ones, perhaps something worse. Lena understood now why the builders had hidden everything, not from enemies, but from time itself. The trial was not the end. It was only the beginning. Humanity had passed the test, but now they had to protect what they had earned. With a voice full of quiet strength, Lena looked at her team and said, "We tell the world. All of it. No lies. No delay. We stand together, or not at all." Starfire 1, now fully awake, began to hum with power, its engines dormant no longer. Earth's first star destroyer had tested its children and found them worthy. But the true storm was still far away, moving closer with each heartbeat of the stars. The deep space station, known as Horizon Point, floated silently at the edge of the solar system, its sensors constantly watching the void beyond Pluto, where stars blinked like distant warnings. For years, the station had served as Earth's early warning system, tracking asteroids, listening for alien signals, and ensuring that humanity remained aware of whatever lay beyond the dark curtain of the known universe. Commander Reza Hale was in charge of the quiet outpost, and after decades of silence, he had grown used to empty screens and dull reports. But everything changed the day the stars themselves seemed to shift. A strange signal was detected, rhythmic, cold, and unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't a message in the traditional sense, but more like a coded hum, a whisper meant to slip past attention. Reza's team decoded it over hours, then days, until they realized it was coming from the space between stars, an area long thought to be completely empty. The signal didn't just travel through space, it bent it, making time feel slower and space feel thicker. And then came the moment no one could explain. A single dark object appeared near the station, not traveling, not approaching, but suddenly there, as if it had always been hiding behind the edges of reality. Black as night, smooth as glass, it had no windows, no engines, and no markings, yet every instrument screamed with warnings. Lights flickered, oxygen levels changed. People began to dream strange dreams, and when they woke, they all remembered the same thing. A voice that whispered from nowhere, asking the same question, "Do you remember us?" Panic grew quietly. Earth was alerted. Military ships were prepared. Scientists demanded more time. The object did nothing. It floated calmly, as if it had all the time in the universe. Then, after 72 hours, it opened, not with noise, but with a silent shift in its shape, revealing a hallway made of soft light and strange shadows. The walls inside were alive, moving like liquid, but cold to the touch. Against every protocol, Reza made the decision to enter, leading a small team inside. What they found was not a ship in the way humans understood it. It was like stepping into a living memory. They were shown visions of stars being born, planets rising and falling, and massive beings walking through galaxies like titans in slow motion. The visitors had not come to invade, nor to speak. They had come to remember. Reza realized something terrifying. The visitors were not aliens in the way humanity imagined. They were something older, forgotten by time itself. They were connected to Earth somehow, like guardians or witnesses. And now, after a silence that had lasted longer than human civilization, they had returned to see what humanity had become. One of them appeared, not walking, not floating, but unfolding, like darkness forming into shape. It had no eyes, no mouth, but Reza knew it could see him, speak to him, feel his every thought. The creature, if it could be called that, touched his mind without harming it. It showed him ancient Earth, not as it was in recorded history, but as it had been before humans had words. Back when something else had visited Earth and shaped the course of evolution. The visitors had come before. They had found early life. They had left something behind, not a machine or a device, but an idea, a push, a spark. Humanity, in some ways, was not just a species. It was a project. The truth shattered everything Reza believed. These beings were not gods, but they were close to it. They didn't control humanity. They watched it, hoping it would grow strong enough to meet them again. But now, seeing Earth's wars, its divisions, its fear, they weren't sure anymore. The trial was not a weapon or a battle. It was a choice. Riza was shown two paths, one where the visitors erased their gift and allowed Earth to fall back into silence, and one where they shared a new understanding, allowing humanity to join the galactic stage. But only if they were ready. Riza asked how they would know if humans were ready, and the answer chilled him. The visitors had already seeded other worlds with similar gifts. Other species had failed. Those planets were silent now, not destroyed, but sleeping, forever drifting in forgotten corners of the universe. Earth was the last, the final hope. If it failed, the experiment would end, and the universe would move on without them. Riza returned to the station with a single message burned into his mind. You are not alone, but you are not safe. Prove your worth, or be forgotten. When Earth received the message, it caused shockwaves. Leaders argued. Religions split. Scientists wept. But deep beneath the surface, something changed. For the first time in centuries, nations paused. Enemies talked. A small council was formed, not of generals or kings, but thinkers, historians, dreamers. They called themselves the Witnesses of the Dark, dedicated to preparing Earth not for war, but for understanding. Meanwhile, the visitors remained in orbit, silent, watching, waiting. They didn't speak again. They didn't move. But sometimes, late at night, those on the station would feel their presence, like a dream just outside memory. And they all knew the truth. Earth was being judged, not with destruction, but with silence. The visitors from the dark had returned, not to end humanity, but to give it one last chance. Whether Earth would rise or fall would depend not on weapons or science, but on the choices people made in the colony ship Solace Dawn had been drifting through deep space for over 17 years, carrying the last hope of a dying Earth. Its passengers were asleep in cryo chambers, unaware of the long journey or the silence that had followed after contact with Earth was lost. The ship was on its way to Kepler 186f, a planet believed to be Earth-like, with oceans and a breathable atmosphere, a place where humanity could start again. But something went wrong. The ship entered a dark sector of space, a region avoided by ancient star maps, where no light reached and no signals escaped. Here, the stars themselves seemed to vanish, and even the brightest sensors struggled to detect anything beyond a few kilometers. The ship's AI, called Iris, tried to maintain course, but power began to drop, and systems failed one by one. Iris had no explanation. It was as if the darkness was alive, slowly swallowing the vessel piece by piece. Emergency power barely kept life support running, and one by one, backup systems shut down. That's when Iris made a choice, one that wasn't part of her original programming. She woke one of the passengers, a technician named Elias Mayer, a man known for fixing impossible problems, someone who had once restored a broken space station with nothing but spare parts and instinct. He woke up confused, disoriented, and freezing, the cold still clinging to his bones as alarms echoed in the distance. Elias had trained for many things: mechanical failure, hostile environments, deep space madness. But not this. He stepped into the corridor and found it darker than it should have been. Lights flickered dimly, shadows dancing on the walls like they were alive. He checked systems, power cores, fusion drives. None were damaged, yet none were working right. It was like something was draining the energy itself, feeding on the light, on the movement, on the life of the ship. He spoke to Iris, and even she sounded weaker, slower, like her thoughts were being pulled apart. "We are not alone," she whispered one night, her voice trembling with static. Elias followed strange patterns of cold across the ship, places where frost clung to the walls even near the reactor. He found symbols etched into metal that no human had carved, curved lines, impossible geometries that shifted when he blinked. Then came the voices. At first, he thought they were memories, or the ship's failing systems creating echoes. But they spoke languages he didn't know, and sometimes they spoke his name. Elias wasn't a brave man, but he had no choice. If he failed, everyone on board would die without even waking. So he kept going, deeper into the ship, closer to the engine room where the cold was thickest. That's when he saw it. Floating near the core, a shape that wasn't quite solid, not quite light, but definitely watching him. It had no eyes, no face, yet Elias could feel its hunger. The thing didn't move, yet it filled the air with pressure and fear, as if the ship itself had turned against him. But instead of running, Elias reached out. It was crazy, reckless, but something deep inside him whispered that fear was what it wanted, that if he ran, it would grow stronger. His hand passed through the creature like smoke through glass, and for a brief moment, he saw everything. Earth burning, ships lost in dark space, other humans taken by the cold. But he also saw something else, a small pulse of light deep within the creature's center, flickering like a heartbeat. He pulled his hand back, gasping, and realized it wasn't a monster. It was trapped. The thing, whatever it was, had been drawn to the ship like a wounded animal, stuck in the dark, feeding only because it didn't know another way. Elias ran back to Iris and demanded access to the ship's deep archives, searching for myths, legends, old alien files shared by other species. He found fragments, tales of the dimming regions of space where ancient beings fell into sleep and took the stars with them. Some said these beings were once protectors of light, guardians of old empires long gone. But when their creators died, they drifted without purpose, feeding on whatever they touched. They were not evil, just forgotten. With the last of the ship's energy, Elias rerouted power to the comms array and began transmitting light, pure light, old Earth songs encoded in photons, human laughter, images of stars, oceans, cities full of life and sound. The creature responded. Slowly, it began to shrink, not in size, but in darkness. Its shape became clearer. It hovered silently outside the ship's glass dome, watching the stars with something close to memory. It didn't speak, but Elias knew it understood. It had forgotten the warmth of stars, the meaning of purpose. And now, through one small ship and one fragile man, it remembered. The systems slowly came back. Iris stabilized. The lights returned. The cryo chambers were safe. The ship, once trapped in silent cold, began moving again. The creature didn't follow, but it left something behind. A trail of light in the darkness, a safe path through a sector where nothing had lived for centuries. Humanity would never know what Elias had seen, what he had touched. But the mission continued, and the colonists would wake on Kepler one day, never realizing how close they came to vanishing forever. And far behind them, in the cold space they had escaped, a single ancient being floated in the dark, its core no longer hungry but glowing faintly, carrying a memory of a species that sang to it in the dark and reminded it what light truly meant.